The sound of the helmet hitting the marble floor was swallowed by the silence of the room, but the sound that followed, a scream that tore from the throat of the queen, was loud enough to shatter glass. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. You have to understand that Queen Isolde was not a woman who screamed. They called her the Ice Orchid. She had ruled the kingdom of Valoria alone for 5 years, ever since the bloody civil war that took her husband and solidified her power. She was cold, calculating, and absolutely unflappable. She had looked executioners in the eye and watched cities burn without blinking, but today was the day of the grand melee. It was a tradition where the greatest knights in the realm fought for the honor of becoming the queen's personal protector. For 3 days, blood had soaked the sand of the arena. And for 3 days, one knight had dominated everyone. They called him the Rust Knight. He wore armor that looked like it had been dredged up from the bottom of a swamp, corroded, pitted, and ugly. He bore no crest, no colors, and he spoke no words. He fought with a brutality that was terrifying to watch. He didn't just defeat opponents. He dismantled them. He fought like a man who didn't care if he lived or died, as long as he took someone with him. It came down to the final duel. The Rust Knight versus Sir Kalen, the commander of the Queen's Guard, a man in shining golden armor, arrogant and skilled. The fight lasted 3 minutes. It ended when the Rust Knight caught Kalen's sword with his bare gauntlet hand, twisted it from his grip, and kicked the commander to the dirt. The Rust Knight didn't kill him. He simply stepped over the fallen commander and walked straight toward the royal box. The crowd went silent. This was a breach of protocol. The winner was supposed to wait for the queen to descend. But this man was marching up the steps, his heavy boots thudding against the wood. The royal guards tensed, gripping their spears, but Queen Isolde raised her hand. Let him approach, she said, her voice cool as a winter morning. She was curious. Who was this savage who fought like a demon? The Rust Knight stopped 10 feet from her throne. He smelled of old iron, sweat, and dried blood. He towered over her. You have fought well, Queen Isolde said, leaning forward. You have earned the right to serve. But I do not employ nameless ghosts. Remove your helmet. The knight stood motionless. The wind whistled through the slits in his rusted visor. I said, remove your helmet, Isolde commanded, her voice sharpening. Or my archers will remove your head. The knight slowly reached up. His gauntlets creaked. He undid the clasps at his throat. The sound was agonizingly slow. Click. Click. Isolde watched closely. She expected to see a mercenary. Maybe a disfigured veteran. Maybe a foreign prince. The helmet slid off, the knight shook his head, and a mane of tangled, salt and pepper hair fell loose. He looked up, and his eyes, piercing, icy blue, locked onto hers. Isolde stopped breathing. The goblet of wine in her hand slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the floor, staining her white dress red. The man standing before her had a scar running down his left cheek. He had a crooked nose. But she knew every line of that face. She had kissed that face 1,000 times. She had memorized it in the dark. It was King Alaric, her husband, the man she had personally sentenced to death 5 years ago. You have to understand the horror of this moment. Isolde had watched the axe fall. She had seen his head severed from his body. She had visited his tomb every week for 5 years. She was wearing his signet ring on her finger right now. He was dead. He was buried under 6 feet of stone and concrete. It was physically, medically, scientifically impossible for him to be standing here, but there he was. Breathing. Sweating. Looking at her with a mixture of love and infinite sadness, Isolde stood up, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. Alaric, she whispered, the word escaping her like a plea, and then, the scream built up in her chest. It wasn't just fear. It was the shattering of her reality. She screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror that echoed through the entire arena. Impossible, she shrieked, backing away until she hit her throne. You are dead. I saw you die. The man who looked like Alaric took a step forward. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his rusted armor and pulled out an object. He tossed it onto the floor at her feet. It was a head, but it wasn't a human head. It was a mask. A wax mask, incredibly realistic, modeled to look exactly like Alaric. The fake head had a gash on the neck where an axe would strike. You saw what you wanted to see, Isolde, the man rasped, his voice rough from years of silence. You killed a decoy. But you didn't kill the truth, the guards were shouting now, rushing the box. Protect the queen. Kill the necromancer, wait. The man shouted, raising his hands. Before you kill me again, look at your advisor. Look at Lord Malachi. Isolde, hyperventilating, looked to her right. Lord Malachi, her most trusted advisor, the man who had convinced her that Alaric was a traitor, the man who had arranged the execution. Malachi wasn't looking at the ghost. He was looking at the exit. His face was pale as a sheet, and he was inching toward the door. He lied to you. Izzy, the Rust Knight said, using the nickname only her husband knew. He staged the coup. He replaced me with a look-alike poor soul to die in my place, and he threw me in the deepest dungeon to rot. He wanted you to rule alone so he could rule you. Isolde looked at the man she loved. Then she looked at the man she trusted. Is this true? She demanded, turning to Malachi. Her fear was evaporating, replaced by a cold, murderous rage. Malachi pulled a dagger from his robes. He's lying. He's a demon. Kill him. Malachi lunged, not at the knight, but at the queen. The dagger was inches from Queen Isolde's throat. Malachi moved with the desperate speed of a rat cornered in a trap. But rats are fast, wolves are faster. Alaric didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't have time. He simply threw his body between his wife and the blade. Shink, the dagger didn't hit flesh. It slammed into the rusted breastplate of the Rust Knight, sparking against the pitted metal. The blade skidded harmlessly off the iron and buried itself in the velvet upholstery of the throne. Before Malachi could pull the knife back for a second strike, Alaric's hand shot out. His gauntlet, heavy and crusted with the grime of the arena, clamped around Malachi's throat. You should have made sure the dungeon had no rats, Malachi, Alaric growled, lifting the advisor off his feet. Rats dig tunnels. And kings have long memories. Alaric slammed Malachi against the stone pillar of the balcony. The force was so violent that a crack appeared in the masonry behind the advisor's head. The dagger clattered to the floor. The royal guards finally surged into the box, spears leveled. But they stopped. They looked at the queen, pale and shaking. They looked at the Rust Knight, who was currently strangling the prime minister with one hand. And they looked at the face of the man they thought dead. Stand down. Isolde commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. Do not touch him. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Alaric. She reached out and touched the rusted armor that had saved her life. Then her hand moved up to his face, tracing the scar on his cheek. They told me you were a traitor, she whispered, tears spilling over. They told me you conspired with the enemy. They brought me evidence, forged, Alaric rasped, not letting go of Malachi's throat. All of it. Malachi needed a puppet queen. He drugged me, dragged me to the black cells, and replaced me with a poor peasant who looked enough like me to fool a crowd from a distance. He put a hood on the man before the axe fell. You didn't execute your husband, Izzy. You executed an innocent decoy. Malachi clawed at the iron fingers crushing his windpipe. Mercy. He wheezed. Your Majesty, mercy. Alaric's eyes were cold blue fire. For 5 years, I ate rats in the dark. For 5 years, I listened to the guards laugh about how the Ice Orchid was ruling exactly as they planned. I clawed my way through stone and sewage to get out. I walked 1,000 miles in stolen armor just to get back to this city. And you ask for mercy? Alaric looked at Isolde. He loosened his grip slightly, allowing Malachi to breathe, but not to escape. "He is yours," Alaric said softly. "You are the queen. His fate is your command." Isolde looked at Malachi, the man she had trusted, the man who had comforted her while she grieved for the husband he had stolen. Her expression hardened. The ice was back, but this time, it was a weapon. "You wanted to rule through me, Malachi," Isolde said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "You wanted to be the power behind the throne." She picked up the dagger Malachi had dropped. She walked over to the balcony edge and pointed to the arena below, where the Rust Knight had won his victory. "Throw him over," she commanded. Alaric didn't hesitate. He dragged the screaming advisor to the edge of the royal box. Below, the lions had not yet been caged. The crowd looked up, gasping. "Long live the queen," Alaric whispered into Malachi's ear. He let go. Malachi's scream was long and shrill, ending abruptly with a sickening thud on the sands of the arena. The crowd roared, not in horror, but in a frenzy of confusion and bloodlust. Alaric turned back to Isolde. The adrenaline was fading, and the exhaustion of the fight, and the 5 years of torture, was setting in. He swayed. Isolde caught him. She didn't care about the mud, the rust, or the blood. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "I am sorry," she sobbed into his neck. "I am so sorry." Alaric wrapped his arms around her, the rusted metal creaking. "We have time, Izzy. We have the rest of our lives." He pulled away slightly and looked at the guards, who were staring in awe. "My armor is ruined," Alaric said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I believe I left my golden set in the armory." "Fetch it." The captain of the guard dropped to one knee, slamming his fist against his chest. "At once, your majesty." One by one, the guards knelt. Then the nobles in the box. And as the news spread from the balcony to the stands, 50,000 people fell silent, then erupted into a chant that shook the foundations of the city. "The king lives! The king lives!" Alaric took Isolde's hand. He led her to the edge of the balcony, raising their joined hands high in the air. The Rust Knight was gone. The king had returned. And the ice orchid would never be cold again.